Takami, and welcome everyone. All right, kick us off. We want to make sure everybody in attendance understands the purpose of the meeting that we're setting out to accomplish. First and foremost, we are here to update you about our revisions to our city wetland regulations. And then following that, we are going to be gathering feedback from you, from our public, on staff progress in this initiative. The agenda for today is going to start out with a review of our current wetland regulations. We're going to present some substantial legislative and judgment updates to our progress here in the form of the Montana SB 382 and the Supreme Court Sackett case. We're then going to discuss our progress on local options for wetland mitigation, provide the policy guidance that we've received from our Bozeman City Commission, and then open it up for a bit of a general Q&A with just me before, if needed, separating out into groups and having more of a small group discussion on some of the specifics to this work. Takami, I believe we were gonna try to provide a link to the Engage Bozeman page for the project. That will include opportunities to comment and also to review some select portions of our draft code.
Yep, that'll come in a bit.
So you guys will be able to see that in the chat and take a read through there as we go. All right, starting off with a bit of a timeline. We began the first public work session for this project with a Bozeman City Commission work session on July 25th of this year. We had done some substantial amount of background research and collaboration with some local advocacy groups prior to that. And then following that 725 meeting where we received policy guidance from Commission, we took that to the Community Development Board for an introductory presentation. Following that, we are here today for our open public meetings. We'll have this online session right now, followed by an in-person session later on. This will be sort of a pre-draft code opportunity for public engagement. Following this meeting, we're going to incorporate what we hear from the public into our final draft and present that to the Community Development Board for review on November 6th. That will be sort of your post-draft opportunity for engagement. And then following that, we'll head to Bozeman City Commission on December 5th for the provisional adoption of the ordinance that will codify our changes. That will be your final draft opportunity for engagement. And following that, the final read and adoption by Bozeman City Commission will come at our last meeting of the year on December 19th. Getting into project background, first and foremost, why so much focus on wetlands? Well, as the EPA states, wetlands protect and improve water quality, provide fish and wildlife habitat, store floodwaters, and maintain surface water flow to our valued streams during dry periods. Wetland protection and in general, environmental stewardship are strongly encouraged and strong policy goals of our Bozeman City Commission as a function of what we hear from you, our public. And so this wetland work is in direct response to that, in our need and interest in tightening up how we protect our waterways and our wetlands within the valley here. This conforms directly to several options or several ideas in our Bozeman strategic plan that serves our goals for watershed management, climate change adaptation and mitigation, as well as habitat for wildlife, both our flora and fauna here locally. These are also, this project is also directly in compliance with our Bozeman Community Plan of 2020 and their priorities. Those directly note working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to keep wetland mitigation within Gallatin Valley, as well as identifying, prioritizing, and preserving key wildlife habitat and corridors. So this project and the goals that we'll accomplish here directly serve those goals as well. We're going to go through a bit of a definitional section here, just to make sure everybody is on the same page with what we are trying to do and what the goal is to accomplish. So first and foremost, how do we define wetlands? Well, wetlands are areas that contain all three of the wetland indicators that define these features. Those are hydrophytic vegetation, hydric soils, and hydrology of sufficient frequency and duration to produce hydric soils and support hydrophytic vegetation. I'm just a traffic engineer by trade, but I am grateful to have technical experts on staff like Brian Heaston, who can adequately understand what we're dealing with here and direct us in the right direction. So thank you for Brian for some help there. So moving on then, how does the city perform our wetland regulation duties? Well, our city community development division, planning division, manages 2 wetland consultant contracts who are experts within the valley here in this field in order to implement our Unified Development Code wetland regulations. So these sit in Chapter 38 of our Bozeman Municipal Code. That's the UDC portion. And we have highly qualified, technically competent professionals within this community who come in and do sort of an independent or review of this work itself. What is the role then of the Army Corps of Engineers? Well, the Army Corps is the federal agency who enforces Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. That includes jurisdiction of waters of the United States and other aspects of this critically important regulation. The critical thing to note here is, as the federal agency, they do have what's known as supremacy over these regulations, meaning that essentially they get the first crack at regulating this type of thing, and that whatever they do not cover would then fall back to the potential for local control. What regulatory intent does the city and the Army Corps follow? So this is simply the high-level backbone theory of how we regulate wetlands and wetland impacts. That starts first and foremost with avoidance. We strongly encourage and direct developers and ourselves when we develop capital projects to do everything we can within reason to avoid the impact of the wetland altogether. If there is no option for avoiding it altogether, we then minimize those impacts as much as we can. That could be changing of lots, changing of orientation, changing of roadway sections, or types of construction in order to minimize how much that of impact occurs. And finally, or lastly, we then require to mitigate those wetland impacts where they are unavoidable. And so how does that regulatory authority work? Well, the city, again, based on supremacy, we do rely on permitting from the U.S. Army Corps for those overlapping regulations. We kind of think of this as this little exhibit to the bottom right of the screen. If the overall circle here is the overall authority for regulating wetlands, at least up until about July of this year, the U.S. Army Corps took the lion's share of that overlapping authority. So that is the sort of the red circle within the larger circle. And then the city of Bozeman or any local municipality has just a sliver there. What are some differences between the city and how we regulate and how the Army Corps does? Well, we are substantially stronger in our regulations. That means regulating wetland impacts down to as much as 400 square feet. It's an awfully small area. And also regulating isolated wetlands not connected to waters of the United States. Additionally to that, we overlay those wetland regulations with additional water course setbacks to enhance those protections even greater. Brings us to a few legislative and court decisions that have greatly impacted this project of ours to enhance our own wetland protections. First, was a judgment that came down from the Supreme Court of the United States, known as the Sackett case. Prior to Sackett, federally regulated wetlands included wetlands with what's known as a significant nexus to interstate or navigable waters. However, post-Sackett, those federally regulated wetlands only include wetlands with a continuous surface connection to waters of the United States. consequences of this ruling are fairly far-ranging. First, that significant nexus evaluation no longer applies. Neither they nor we are allowed to use that determination anymore. And that means that millions, potentially millions of acres of wetlands nationwide are no longer eligible to be regulated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So only those with those continuous surface connections are now legally allowed to be regulated by the U.S. Army Corps. However, that does allow local authority to potentially fill that gap if so chosen. So what that means moving forward, our overlapping authority diagram shrinks considerably in what the Army Corps has now supremacy over regulating, and expands much more room for a municipality like the city of Bozeman to step in to fill that gap if they so chose. Additionally to that, our Montana legislature passed a significant bill this last session called SB 382, that's known as the Montana Land Use and Planning Act. This is a very wide-ranging piece of legislation that will substantially overhaul how land development is performed within the state. But to try to boil that down to a couple take-home points, this Montana Land Use and Planning Act requires cities to plan for growth and adopt infrastructure plans to support those goals. Those infrastructure plans then become the point, the growth plan and infrastructure plans then become the point where public engagement is focused. Those are that's at the planning and policy level. And that means though that public engagement will be reduced at the development action level. So the public's chance to engage and have their priorities and opinions known are going to largely come through the policy and planning phases that the city puts together, and less so at each development action that comes forth. And then that moves the site development procedures to be more of an administrative function that would be handled within the staff level and less so at the commission level. So we hear from people already when our senior planner Chris Saunders, he's been our lead on not only our overall UDC overhaul process, but also making sure we understand exactly what we need to do to come into compliance with SB 382. He hears a lot, then how am I supposed to comment on a project moving forward? Well, as we understand right now, and things are very much still in flux as all of our cities that are regulated under 382 work together to figure out what this looks like. We understand right now that you'll have a chance to comment in writing, and that's only in writing by state law. However, that final decision would still be handled at the staff level, the administrative level, subject to appeal of those decisions. And so that's, we're trying to really get the word out and be as clear as we can with our public, that the past method of public hearings at commission meetings and site plan reviews aren't necessarily going to be how this gets regulated moving forward. And so it's critical to hear input at these phases of projects where the policy and planning can be done. So that gets to the heart of our conversation today, which is our wetland mitigation project. So this, again, was a city commission priority coming into this session, this 2-year session. They directed staff with the goal to mitigate all wetland impacts within the existing watershed, within the same watershed where they occur, at a 1-to-1 rate. So no net loss of wetlands within the existing watershed, within the current watershed that we operate. Our options to get there are generally fourfold. One, use an existing regional wetland bank that is currently located out in Twin Bridges. Set up a local wetland bank, mitigate those impacts on site where they occur, or utilize what's known as cash in lieu, where we would collect a payment for that impact that is commensurate with what could be used to replace those wetlands in kind. In terms of that local wetland bank progress, we are thrilled to have such a phenomenal private partner in town right now in the Sacagawea Audubon Society as they work to set up and operate the Ingerland Audubon Wetland Preserve. I want to be very clear that this is not a public project. This is not a city project. The Sacagawea Audubon Society absolutely deserves the bulk of the credit here to set this up for the benefit of the community and protection of our environmental resources. We as the city, though, are happy to be a partner with them here as they work through the site development process to set that up. And that mostly comes in terms of trying to facilitate some meetings with MDT and MRL, which are both property stakeholders that will need to be worked with in order to set this up. So Sacagawea's progress so far, they're about 70% design complete. They've started thinking about some rate structure plan rate structures for the wetland bank that would be not only competitive with market conditions, but also help us encourage some of that local mitigation to stay within the area. They project to have about 4 years of credit capacity out there. So that's sort of my and our heads up, both internally and to potentially even some of our advocate and developer friends, that once that wetland bank would be filled up and credits taken, we would be looking to very much develop a secondary one so that we can continue to mitigate impacts within the valley here. We've gratefully had the project's haul route approved by MDT, and slowly but surely re-engaging with MRL in order to handle some potential right-of-way and easement issues that we're hoping to get worked out with them. So again, we want to thank our partners there and encourage them to continue fighting the good fight with our railroad friends and maximizing what this facility can be for the public. So then that brings us to our city commission policy guidance. So as we work here in the city of Bozeman, our city commission directs staff at the policy level, which we then take and execute and operationalize. So we had a work session with them where we kind of gave them a very similar presentation to what I just walked through with you. And we asked them at that point to provide us some direction in prioritization of what those mitigation options might be. What they suggested or told us to investigate, first and foremost, prioritize mitigation of those impacts on site when feasible. We've had actually a couple really interesting projects come through this year where we've been able to make that happen. There's been a wetland impact on site. The conditions to encourage wetlands are also present elsewhere on that site. And the developer and their architects and engineers have managed to actually create a very nice community feature out of that mitigation without detrimentally impacting the greater public good of the project. If on-site mitigation is not feasible, we've been directed then to prioritize purchase of Army Corps certified local wetland bank credit. So again, that is preserving wetlands within the existing watershed through purchase of credits as mitigation for the impact 1-to-1, square foot to square foot. If that is not available either, then our third option to prioritize would be that cash in lieu option. So acquire cash in lieu from the developer for those impacts, and then be able to distribute that to a project within the valley, within the existing watershed, for those wetlands to be enhanced or saved. And then finally, if all those options are unable to be brought to fruition, then our last option there would be to go back and use that regional wetland bank. Unfortunately, though, that would be outside of our existing watershed for now. Additionally to that focused question on the policy guidance for the project we were given, we wanted to be sure we brought them the consequences of the SAC decision and gave them an opportunity to direct how the city should move forward from here. What they have decided to direct is to use city resources to fill that regulatory gap left by the Army Corps. I want to be very, very clear about what an important step this is and will be into the future. As of now, we understand that we are the only city in Montana who is taking steps to make sure that regulatory gap is filled. So not only do we currently have, but we will in the future have the most robust regulatory wetland framework of anywhere in the state. And that really speaks to our commitment to environmental stewardship. We do expect, unfortunately, that responsibility to come with a price. We will essentially have to take on the services and role that the Army Corps plays right now for those wetland impacts and those wetlands that are no longer regulated by them. We are working with them closely, as quite frankly, they understand and learn what the implications of the second decision will be for their own operations, as well as assist us in understanding what we'll need to take on to fill that gap. This is a very high level estimate, but we do see this counting for several $100,000 a year in cost. Commission at that time, though, did give us direction to seek a program cost recovery model in order to fill that gap, which essentially means having the development actions that cause the impact and require the oversight to then also pay for that oversight as it happens. And they've also directed us to figure out a way to provide some interim enforcement of our UDC requirements as we're in a little bit of a rulemaking and figuring out phase with the Army Corps and how post-SACIT regulations will move forward. So with that, that's the high level of our project. I will first take some open questions. I think Takami might try and facilitate some of those. And then from there, Takami, I think we'll take your judgment on if we need to do some breakout groups or if we should just have the open comment here with everybody.
All right, so let's start with our Q&A. I think we will go to breakout groups, just super small ones. But let's start with Q&A first, and you guys will have the chance to just sort of give your own personal feedback in the breakout groups, so please save that for then. If you have a question, feel free to drop that in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll just sort of see if anyone has anything right off the bat. All right, let's go over to Chris Nixon first. Chris, let me know if you are having any issues unmuting and saying your question.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I just it was stated that the mitigation was 1-to-1, and I think they did say that that was acreage, and I'm just wondering if they were also using the wetland credit model scale, where it's more of a wetland value.
That's a great question. Brian, would you have any technical insight over that, or Chris maybe?
Well, to address the question, Chris, I think I would say that you know, the model in which the commission endorsed during our policy conversation with them was to utilize Army Corps sanctioned local mitigation banks. So we would be reliant upon the Army Corps and their regulations and making those determinations of 1-to-1 with respect to functional class.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, and we're going to head over to Chris Budesky, our other Chris.
Looks like we have a lot of Chris's here today. I want to ask a couple of questions. First off, you mentioned, Nick, that there's 2 professionals working with the city in reviewing applications. Who are they?
William Kleindl, Dr. William Kleindl, and Brian, help me out with the other name. Or Chris.
That'd be Lynn Bacon, just to let you know.
Thank you. Sorry about
Okay,
that. Ron.
Thanks. Number 2 is there's a few infill properties in the city, and if we're developing one of them and there's a small, pond on it, or even a wetland not connected to a stream, what's going to be the process for a cash in lieu? Because some of these are too small to mitigate on site and efficiently develop the lot.
Sure. So we are very much still in the draft phase of what the process for this entire change in regulation is going to look like. However, we have posted some select sections for review on that Engage page, primarily focused on that mitigation component, and then the requirement component as well of what you're going to have to submit moving forward. The additional process work is frankly what we're still working out, and what will be included in the final draft.
Last question. Can this application be submitted without a site plan? Because there's properties that are under contract, they're not going to close if you know there's a big wetlands in the middle of it. So will the city take applications prior to site plan?
That again, I think is going to have to be one of those issues that we work out with the Army Corps operationally. I don't know unless Chris or Brian have a strong lean in one direction. If I could give you an answer on that right now, Chris.
I can add to that a little bit. Currently, the regulations as they stand would allow somebody to do a wetland only permit application. We've done a couple of those, not very many. They're a little challenging because when you're looking at the viability of your on-site mitigation and other kinds of things, if you don't know what someone's trying to do, you're working on a little bit more of a blank canvas, and so it's harder to balance some of the issues that we're charged with balancing as we're doing the overall analysis. So it is possible. Certainly understand the idea that people may be leery about committing to a substantial property purchase when they don't know what they can do on that property.
Okay, thank you.
But to Nick, your second question there, Chris, that's one of the reasons why in the draft material that's posted on Engage Postman, there is a prioritized list of mitigation options. So the reality is each option has its pros and cons, and some things just aren't practical to do. And so if it's not, then we move along to another alternative.
Thanks.
Any other burning questions? Lorraine, let's go to you next.
I'm sorry, I had a little bit of an issue of connecting, but so I might be repeating a question. Back to the last option of regional banks. Just, is that the goal, is to keep that on there, or are you going to not leave that, take that option off and use all options to keep those wetlands within the watershed?
Great question, Lorraine. That would be, I would term our option of last resort. We did feel it was important to include that. I mean, there's always a hypothetical situation where the first three options were infeasible. You know, potentially the local wetland bank would fill. There wouldn't be the conditions on site to mitigate. And we couldn't work out an agreeable cash in lieu situation. At that point, we would want to make sure that there was at least some option remaining for us. However, the way the code would be written, that would very much be an option of last resort.
Thank you. I just wanted an example of what would be an option, why a cash in lieu wouldn't work out.
We can certainly work, you know, I don't know if Brian or Chris could come up with one off the top of your heads right now. But if not, Lorraine, that's certainly the kind of comment that we could workshop back and sort of gameplay out to see if it's even necessary to remain.
I can touch on that a little bit. The idea of a cash in lieu presumes that there is an appropriate qualified entity to receive that cash in lieu and to execute the wetland mitigation that's required. So if there isn't somebody in our local area who is qualified to do that under the Army Corps and whatever other criteria may apply, then although it's allowed in the code, practically it's not available.
right. Let's head over to William.
Oh, I'll keep my question short. I'm planning on showing up this afternoon at the library as well, but the Gallatin Watershed Council wrote a memo and did some inline edits of all the code that touches wetlands and aquatic resources. I got a copy of those inline edits, and I added my own and responded to some of theirs. Am I sending them to you, Nick? How will I ensure that they've been seen and I can see the response to my comments?
Yes, sir. And again, we're going to request that you send those in as official public comment here so that we could post them and make sure that information is known to all.
Is that the slide says send directly to Nick?
You got it. That's me.
Okay, so when I just want to make sure that the loop is closed, that I know that you've seen the comments, because my previous discussions with you, I'm pretty deep into the code and review, and I want to make sure that those things are seen.
You got it.
Right. Well, I'm going to show this evening too.
We'll see you there.
Okay.
All right, next, let's hear from John.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Gotcha, John.
Hi. So first of all, I want to thank the city for making this effort. This is really awesome that the city is putting all its resources into wetland protection within the city limits. And I really hope that the county, I know the county has some wetland protection goals too, but I really hope they take a cue from the city and approach that aggressively. So my question is not really related to the wetland regs specifically. I wanted to just make it, you probably don't have an answer for this, but under Senate Bill 382, and I understand things are kind of murky at this point about that, but would the public still have an opportunity to comment on a subdivision application?
Chris, I'm going to ask you to jump in when I say something wrong here, but my understanding of that answer or of that question would be that public would always have the option to submit a comment on something in writing, but not necessarily in the form that we think of now with a commission hearing coming up where they can go and comment at that each stage of development. Am I largely correct on that, Chris?
Yes, I think that the other piece that's part of this is part of what Senate Bill 382 does is put a lot of emphasis on planning in advance and policy engagement in advance. But it has a provision that says, all right, if someone's proposing something that was previously analyzed and discussed.
I can't hear Chris. Can you speak up a little bit?
I will do my best. Senate Bill 382 has a provision that says if the public planning work and policy work fully addressed what someone's proposing to do, then the city does not issue a notice of the fact that that application's in review. It's still there, it's a public document, it's in our office, etc. But if someone's proposing something above and beyond what we originally analyzed, then we do a notice and there is a formal comment period. So it's like Nick said, it's going to look different than what we're historically accustomed to. So
yeah, it sounds a lot different. I mean, the way it is now, the way you're describing it, and I understand this is not something generated by the city, this is a state regulation, but the public would have to somehow figure out that a subdivision is being applied for while it's being, there would be no public notice, there would just be an application, we'd have to track it, we'd have to submit written comments. Wow, that's a huge change in the way that things are done, and I doubt that most people have any idea that this change is coming. I just want to make that comment. It's sort of a scary concept.
Certainly understand that it's been something we've been talking about with the larger update to the Unified Development Code ever since the state passed that bill this spring. And we're talking internally about, how do we not necessarily publish a notice, but at least let people know that there's applications having been submitted. And we're trying to figure out what's the best way of doing that. If you're familiar with our community development viewer, it's a tool that folks can check on at their convenience.
Would it be possible to add in and still comply with the state law to have like signs put up on the property boundary? Like sometimes I know in some cases when there's going to be a plat change, for example, or other examples of changes, if you drive by, you'll see a little sign that says, there's something happening here, call such and such. Or would it be possible to have that?
Those are part of our existing notice process. And so that would be something that we'll be looking into and figuring out exactly the mechanics of how, if that crosses the line into the notice, or if there's a different.
Yeah.
Different way
Okay,
of
thanks, Chris.
approaching
That's all I have.
All right, let's go over to Holly.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so just appreciate everyone's work on this and encouraged to see that local mitigation is being prioritized over mitigating outside of our watershed. Thank you all for making that a priority, and to the commission. Just wanting to clarify a little bit of what Bill had mentioned earlier about some of those inline edits that the Watershed Council has put together. That was really, a lot of experts coming together, including Lynn Bacon, who helped to develop the original wetland code, getting that input from Bill, and then also Brianna Schultz, who's a local wetland expert. And so we have kind of compiled those. We provided those as public comment at the last community development board meeting, actually 2 weeks ago, as part of the UDC process, but encouraged to see that we can include that here as well. Our comments and inline edits are primarily focused on just clarifying and defining terms in the existing code, really with a goal of thinking about how we can minimize and avoid impacts to wetlands before we have to resort to mitigation. And so, yeah, excited to pass those along to Nick to have a dialogue around that. And yeah, to hopefully we can get some of those sort of clarifying edits made within the code.
Appreciate that, Holly.
Thanks. And we will have a chance to discuss all of your guys' thoughts in the breakout room. So don't feel like you have to share all of those now.
Yeah, and Takami, I suppose I don't think this is an elephant in the room kind of thing, but we very much do appreciate that we need to hear from all members of the community and all aspects and angle of our development processes. And so our goal here is to really bring everybody to the table and come to agreement with terms that we can all work under and support. From the city's perspective, we very much understand the reality of the environment in which we work. And that one means we have already been preempted several times by our state legislature, who believes that we have gone beyond our bounds and how we should regulate certain things within the community. The fact that SB 382 was passed explicitly in order to frankly remove some of that local control from the development process, as well as the Supreme Court decision in the Sackett case and subsequent state legislatures across the country passing preemptive legislation to remove the local option for filling that gap, means that we also want to be very careful and very clear that we can come to terms that all parties can live with and don't invite that kind of backlash that we've unfortunately faced before. So that's why we're being very clear with Holly and William about how their comments, we want to be very transparent about them. We want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to see them and review them right alongside with us. And we are not biasing the process in any way, one way or another. We really feel there's a path here that we can really, as Holly said, clarify and set the terms so that we can all accomplish the goals that we have for each other and ourselves. But that a little bit of background into the city's thought process here, and we hope everybody respects that, respects each other as we try to come to terms we can all work with.
Thanks, Nick. And is it Lorene? I think I mispronounced your name.
No, that's correct. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, you bet.
but I go by anything. I had two quick follow-up questions. One, being on the new Senate or the state bill that was passed, will you be using the UDCs for that state bill to show how you're going to communicate? Will those be entwined into the UDC so that when a property does have wetlands on it, that there will be a different process of communication? So that's my one question. And then a follow-up to the UDCs is, I know that it was presented to the community board, development board on Monday. So how will these UDC codes be now affected by the new changes? And I didn't know if that was in your presentation to come up, or are you talking about how they're going to be implemented with this big change in the current UDCs?
Thanks, Lorene. Chris, I might ask you to jump in and handle the UDC questions if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem. At this point, the overall update to the Unified Development Code and this wetland project are running in parallel. So we are continuing to hold public hearings on the overall Unified Development Code. Community Development Board will see that again next Tuesday, the 10th, and then the following Monday, the 16th. And then the City Commission is scheduled to begin their public hearing process in November. So there's still open time for people to comment on the larger project. What happened, this is not uncommon that there's multiple ordinances that are having to be synchronized over time. And so part of what's called codification is the City Commission will at some point act on both proposals. And then we will harmonize those two. So if the Commission adopts directives that says this is what we are wanting to do with wetlands, then that will take the place of the language that is currently in the Unified Development Code, because our existing wetland language is part of that larger project. In order to not have two sets of edits competing with each other, we made a deliberate choice to not tinker with the wetland code as part of a bigger project and let this effort carry that focus. And then as second part of your question, if someone's proposing a modification to development or to a wetland as part of a development, then the review of that comes along with the rest of the application. And then there was an earlier question in this meeting. Yes, you can do an application specifically just for wetland modification, in which case it comes in independently and we go through all the same processes, depending on the scope and scale of the project.
Thank you. And I do want to also say thank you for taking this on, and thanks for being an example to Montana on how to deal with wetlands. I admire the staff and the commission.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to now transition us into some breakout groups, just so you guys have some time to share your thoughts. And if you have any remaining questions too, you feel free to use that time. Also, if you feel like you've got what you need, feel free to leave the breakout group at any time. So I'm going to open these up and feel free to enter when you have a sec.